It was one of those nights when the air felt heavier, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I'd been the librarian in Ashwood for years, quietly tending to the shelves of our century-old library. There's a certain peace that comes with being surrounded by books, their stories whispered only to those who care to listen. But that night, something was different. The storm outside rattled the windows, and I found myself staying later than usual, almost as if something was urging me to stay. The clock ticked past midnight, and I was alone in the dimly lit library, the shadows lengthening with each passing minute. The section I was working on hadn't been touched in decades. Dust clung to the spines of forgotten books, their titles faded with time. As I reached for a particularly old volume, my fingers brushed against something odd, a small latch hidden behind the bookshelf. My heart skipped a beat, curiosity getting the better of me. With a gentle tug, the latch clicked, and a hidden compartment creaked open. Inside was a worn-out diary, its leather cover cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. The year stamped on the first page read 1890. A shiver ran down my spine, but I couldn't resist the pull of the past, the secrets that lay within those pages. Sitting down at the nearest table, I carefully opened the diary, my hands trembling slightly as I turned the fragile pages. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, as if the author had been racing against time. The name at the top of the first entry caught my eye, William Parker. He was the librarian here over a century ago. The first few entries were mundane, detailing daily tasks and observations about the library, but there was an underlying tension in his words, a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake. The more I read, the more I felt like I was being drawn into William's world, his fears becoming my own. Time seemed to blur as I delved deeper into the diary. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the only sound was the soft rustle of paper as I turned each page. William's entries began to change, growing darker, more frantic. He wrote about strange occurrences in the library, books moving on their own, shadows that seemed to watch him, whispers that filled the silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I read about the night he discovered a secret society that had once used the library's basement for their rituals. The descriptions were vivid, horrifying, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a Gothic novel, not in a real account. I should have stopped reading. Something inside me screamed to close the diary, to put it back where I found it and leave the library. But I couldn't. It was as if the diary had a hold on me, compelling me to continue, to uncover whatever terrible truth William had documented. The final entries were the most chilling of all. William wrote of a summoning, a ritual so dark that it could never be completed, a force so malevolent that even writing about it seemed to give it power. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that whatever William had been trying to stop, whatever he had feared, was now in my hands. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, the wind howling as it whipped against the library's stone walls. I was alone, but I no longer felt alone. There was a presence in the room with me, something watching, waiting. I could almost feel its eyes on me, its breath on the back of my neck. My hands shook as I closed the diary, but I knew it was too late. The door that had been opened couldn't be closed again. I had set something in motion, something I didn't understand, and there was no going back. And so, with the diary clutched in my trembling hands, I made a decision that would change everything. I had to know more. Whatever William Parker had faced, whatever darkness he had tried to contain, It was now my responsibility. Little did I know, the terror was just beginning. The diary seemed to pulse with a life of its own as I reopened it, the pages practically begging to reveal their dark secrets. The handwriting, once neat and orderly, grew more chaotic as I read further, like a man's mind unraveling with every stroke of the pen. William Parker had been a man of routine, a librarian like me, who took solace in the quiet order of the library. But something had shattered the peace, something that began with whispers in the dark and ended with screams. The further I delved, the more I realized that this was no ordinary diary. It was a record of madness, a descent into horror that I could feel creeping into my own soul. William's entries soon shifted from the mundane to the macabre. He wrote of a group, a secret society, that called themselves the Keepers of the Flame. They were a shadowy congregation, meeting in the dead of night beneath the library, in the very basement where I'd never dared to venture. Their purpose: to unlock the secrets of an ancient power, something so dark and malevolent that it defied understanding. William hadn't been one of them, but he had discovered their existence by accident, much like I had stumbled upon his diary. And once he knew, there was no escaping the knowledge, no going back to the world of the ordinary. The more I read, the more I could feel the walls closing in around me, as if the library itself was alive, watching me uncover its darkest secrets. William described the rituals in excruciating detail, the kind of detail that leaves an imprint on your mind, haunting your thoughts long after you've closed the book. The rituals involved blood, symbols carved into flesh, and chants in a language that had no place in our world. But it wasn't the rituals themselves that terrified William. It was what they were trying to summon. He never named it, never gave it a form, but the fear in his words was palpable. Whatever it was something that should never be allowed to exist. As I continued to read, I could almost hear the chants echoing in the silence of the library, the air growing colder with each passing moment. William had tried to stop them, to interfere with their plans, but he was just one man against a force much greater than himself. His words spoke of sleepless nights, of the terror that grew within him as the rituals continued. He tried to warn the town, but no one believed him. They thought he was going mad, that the stress of his work had finally taken its toll. But William knew the truth, and now so did I. The final entries in the diary were the most disturbing. William wrote of a summoning, a ritual that was never meant to be completed. But something went wrong, or perhaps it went exactly as the keepers had planned. The details were fragmented, as if William's mind had begun to break under the weight of what he had witnessed. He wrote of shadows that moved on their own, of a presence in the basement that grew stronger with each passing day. He could feel it watching him, following him, invading his dreams. It was as if the ritual had opened a door that could never be closed. I felt a chill run down my spine as I reached the last entry. William's final words were a warning, not just to himself, but to anyone who might find the diary. He wrote that the evil they had awakened was still there, waiting, and that it would never stop until it was free. He pleaded with whoever read his words to destroy the diary, to bury it where it could never be found. But as I held the fragile pages in my hands, I knew I couldn't do it. The diary had a hold on me, just as it had on William, and I was powerless to resist its pull. With the diary closed and my mind racing, I knew that I had crossed a line. There was no going back to the way things were before. The secrets I had uncovered were now a part of me, and the fear that had driven William to madness was beginning to take root in my own soul. The rituals, the summoning, the presence in the basement, it was all real, and I was about to face the same terror that had consumed William Parker. The diary had left me shaken, but I tried to convince myself that it was just a story, the ramblings of a man who had lost his grip on reality. Yet, the more I tried to dismiss it, the harder it became to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. The library, once a place of comfort and solitude, now felt oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in around me. It started with small things, books falling off shelves for no apparent reason, lights flickering just as I was about to leave for the night. At first, I wrote it off as my imagination, the result of too many late hours spent alone with the diary. But then, the occurrences became more frequent, more sinister. The air in the library grew heavy, thick with an unidentifiable stench that seemed to come from nowhere. It was the kind of smell that made your skin crawl, like something had died and been left to rot, yet no matter how hard I searched, I could never find the source. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, darting away just as I turned to look. I told myself it was nothing, just tricks of the light, but deep down, I knew better. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain, and it was all tied to the damned diary. One night, as I was closing up, I heard it for the first time, the whisper. It was so faint at first that I thought it was the wind, a soft murmur that seemed to echo through the empty library. But as I moved closer to the basement door, the whisper grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, low and urgent, speaking in a language I didn't understand. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my ear to the door, trying to make sense of the words. But before I could decipher anything, the voice stopped, leaving me in a silence that was even more unnerving. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself that I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But as the days went on, the whispers became more frequent, more insistent. They would start the moment I stepped into the library, following me as I moved through the aisles, always growing louder as I neared the basement. I could feel the tension building inside me, a gnawing fear that something was waiting for me just beyond that door. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend that everything was fine, but the more I tried, the more the fear took hold. It wasn't just the whispers. The entire atmosphere of the library seemed to change. The temperature would drop suddenly, leaving me shivering even though the heat was on full blast. Books I had shelved the day before would be found scattered across the floor, their pages torn as if they had been ripped from their bindings. And the shadows, those damned shadows, they were no longer content to stay in the corners. They began to move closer, inching towards me, daring me to confront whatever was lurking within them. One night, after a particularly unsettling day, I found myself standing in front of the basement door, the whispers louder than ever before. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal sending a shock through my system. I hesitated, my mind racing with all the warnings I had read in William Parker's diary. But the fear that had been building inside me was now mixed with a morbid curiosity. I had to know what was behind that door, what was causing the whispers, the shadows, the cold. It was a decision that would change everything. As I turned the knob and slowly opened the door, the whispers suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. The darkness below seemed to pulse with a life of its own, beckoning me to step into the unknown. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but something pushed me forward, a force I couldn't resist. The basement was waiting, and whatever was down there was ready to reveal itself. Little did I know, I was about to uncover a truth more horrifying than anything I could have imagined. I stood at the top of the stairs, the darkness of the basement yawning before me like an open mouth, ready to swallow me whole. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was weighed down by centuries of secrets. My flashlight flickered as I descended the creaky wooden steps, the beam of light cutting through the blackness, but revealing little. The basement had always been a mystery to me, a place I'd never felt the need to explore. But now, with the diary in hand, I knew I had no choice. Whatever was down there, whatever had driven William Parker to the brink of madness, was waiting for me. The moment I stepped off the last stair, the temperature plummeted, a chill that cut straight to my bones. I could see my breath fogging in the air, and I wrapped my coat tighter around me, but it did little to ward off the cold. The basement was vast, filled with dusty relics and forgotten pieces of the library's history. Old furniture, crates, and stacks of books long abandoned created a labyrinth of shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. I navigated the narrow paths between them, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. It felt like I was intruding on something ancient, something that did not want to be disturbed. As I moved deeper into the basement, I began to notice markings on the walls, faint at first, but growing more distinct the further I went. They were symbols carved into the stone, their meaning lost to time, but their intent clear. These were not the harmless doodles of a bored worker. They were part of something much darker. My pulse quickened as I recognized them from William Parker's descriptions in the diary. These were the symbols used in the rituals, the ones that were meant to summon something. My hands shook as I reached out to trace the lines, the cold stone sending a shiver up my spine. The symbols led me to a large open space in the center of the basement, a place that seemed to have been cleared specifically for the rituals described in the diary. The floor was marked with a large, intricate design, the same symbols repeated over and over, forming a circle that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. In the center of the circle was a small, crude altar, stained with what looked like centuries-old blood. My stomach turned as I realized that this was where it had all happened, where the rituals had been performed, where the summoning had taken place. The air was thick with the residue of those dark deeds, a palpable sense of dread that settled over me like a shroud. I felt a presence in the room, something watching me from the shadows. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I had to force myself to keep moving, to keep exploring. There was a door on the far side of the room, partially hidden behind a stack of old crates. It was smaller than the others, almost as if it was trying to stay unnoticed. My flashlight beam wavered as I approached it, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was old, its wood warped and cracked with age, but it had been used recently. The handle was polished, free of the dust that covered everything else. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to leave the basement and never return. But I couldn't. There was something behind that door, something that held the answers to the questions that had been plaguing me since I first found the diary. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, the cold metal biting into my skin. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dark room, the air inside stale and thick with the scent of decay. My flashlight flickered again, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner, something that shouldn't have been there. I stepped into the room, the door creaking shut behind me with a finality that made my heart skip a beat. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with jars and containers that I didn't dare examine too closely. But it was what was in the center of the room that drew my attention, a large book, bound in a material I couldn't quite identify, sitting on a pedestal. The book was open, its pages covered in more of the strange symbols, but these were different, more intricate, more menacing. As I approached, the symbols seemed to shift and writhe on the page, as if they were alive, as if they were waiting for me. The moment I stepped closer to the book, the temperature in the room dropped even further, so cold that it felt like the air itself was freezing around me. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. The book, now mere inches from my trembling hands, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its pages rustling softly as if being turned by an invisible hand. There was an oppressive weight in the air, a presence that I couldn't see but could feel all around me. Whatever force William Parker had tried to contain was now awake, and it was growing stronger with every passing second. I knew I should have turned back, should have left the book untouched and run as far from that basement as possible. But something kept me rooted to the spot, a dark curiosity that overpowered my fear. My hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching out to touch the cover of the book. The moment my fingers brushed against it, a shock of cold ran up my arm, freezing me in place. The whispers I had heard before returned, louder now, more insistent, echoing through the room in that same incomprehensible language. It was as if the book was speaking to me, drawing me in, pulling me deeper into the darkness that surrounded me. The door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, sealing me inside the room. Panic surged through me, but my body refused to move, my hand still resting on the cursed book. The whispers grew louder, more frenzied, and the shadows in the room seemed to close in around me. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. But even without the light, I could still see the symbols on the pages, glowing faintly in the pitch-black room. They twisted and writhed on the page, forming shapes that defied explanation, shapes that seemed to reach out from the book and into my mind. As I stood there, paralyzed by fear and cold, I felt a presence in the room with me, something ancient and malevolent. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. I could feel eyes watching me, unseen but all too real. The weight of that gaze pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but all I could focus on was the overwhelming sense of dread that filled the room. I was no longer alone in that basement. Something else was there with me, something that had been awakened by my intrusion. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a single, clear voice, deep and commanding, speaking directly into my mind. The language was foreign, but I understood its intent all too well. It was a summoning, a call to something beyond this world, something that had been waiting for centuries to be released. The words vibrated through me, resonating with the symbols on the page, and I realized with growing horror that I had become a part of the ritual, that my presence had completed what the keepers of the flame had started all those years ago. The air around me began to swirl, a cold wind whipping through the room despite the lack of any visible source. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, the lines of the summoning circle on the floor illuminating with a sickly light. The book in front of me pulsed with energy, the pages turning faster and faster as if possessed by some unseen force. I could feel the ground beneath my feet vibrating, the very fabric of reality shifting around me as the ritual reached its climax. The voice in my mind grew louder, more demanding, urging me to submit, to give in to the darkness that was enveloping me. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was on the verge of losing myself completely to the malevolent force, the door behind me burst open. The rush of cold air that followed was like a slap to the face, jolting me out of the trance I had fallen into. The room went silent, the whispers vanishing as quickly as they had come. The book snapped shut on its own, the symbols fading from its cover as the oppressive presence retreated, leaving me gasping for breath in the sudden stillness. But the silence was deceptive. I knew, deep down, that this was far from over. The room was still, unnervingly quiet after the chaos that had just unfolded. My breathing was shallow, my heart pounding in my ears as I tried to gather my thoughts. The book, now closed and seemingly inert, sat on the pedestal like a dormant beast, waiting for its next victim. But I wasn't fooled by the silence. The air was thick with tension, a sense of foreboding that told me whatever had been awakened was far from gone. I had to find a way to stop it, to reverse what had been done, but my mind was clouded with fear and confusion. The diary. The diary had to have the answers. With trembling hands, I fumbled to open the diary, desperate to find something, anything, that could help me. But as I flipped through the pages, my heart sank. The once legible words were now smeared, obscured by dark, oily stains that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The more I tried to read, the less I could make out. It was as if the diary itself was being consumed by the very force it had warned against. Panic set in as I realized that the one thing that could have saved me was slipping away, leaving me with no guidance, no hope. The room grew colder, the shadows lengthening as the malevolent presence began to return. I could feel it pressing in on me from all sides, the darkness closing in like a predator circling its prey. My thoughts raced as I tried to remember anything from the diary that could help, any mention of how to banish the entity. But the fear was overwhelming, clouding my mind, making it impossible to think clearly. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the symbols etched into them glowing faintly, as if feeding off my terror. I was running out of time. Then a memory surfaced, William Parker's notes, hastily scrawled in the margins of the diary. He had mentioned something about the relics used in the rituals, how they were the key to controlling the entity. Destroying them, he had written, might be the only way to stop it. It was a slim hope, but it was all I had. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that resembled the relics described in the diary. There, on the shelves lining the walls, were jars, containers, and strange artifacts that seemed to pulse with a dark energy of their own. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest jar and hurled it to the ground. The glass shattered, and a dark, viscous liquid spilled out, hissing as it made contact with the floor. The temperature in the room spiked, a low growl reverberating through the air as the presence grew more agitated. I didn't stop to think. I moved from shelf to shelf, smashing every jar, every relic I could find. Each one released a burst of dark energy, the room vibrating with the force of the entity's anger. But the more I destroyed, the more relentless it became, the shadows closing in on me with terrifying speed. Just as the last relic shattered, a shadowy figure began to take shape in the center of the room, coalescing from the darkness that surrounded me. It was a being of pure malevolence, its form shifting and writhing as it struggled to break free from the confines of the ritual circle. I could feel its hatred, its hunger, pressing down on me like a physical weight. My hands shook as I backed away, knowing that my only hope was to destroy whatever remained of the summoning ritual. But the figure was relentless, its presence suffocating, its eyes, if they could be called that, boring into me with a hatred that chilled me to the core. With a final burst of adrenaline, I grabbed the book from the pedestal and hurled it into the center of the summoning circle. The book burst into flames, the dark energy within it consumed by the fire. The shadowy figure let out a deafening roar, its form flickering and fading as the flames spread, consuming the symbols on the floor, the walls, the very essence of the ritual itself. The room trembled, the ground shaking beneath my feet as the entity fought to maintain its hold on this world. But as the last of the symbols burned away, the figure dissipated into a cloud of black smoke, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The silence that followed was overwhelming, almost suffocating in its intensity. I stood in the middle of the now ruined room, the remnants of the ritual reduced to ashes and smoke. My body was trembling, a mix of exhaustion and lingering fear coursing through me. The entity was gone, banished back to whatever dark realm it had come from, but the memory of its presence lingered, etched into my mind like a scar that would never fully heal. I wanted to believe it was over, that I was safe, but deep down, I knew that some things could never be truly defeated. Stumbling back through the dark basement, I made my way to the stairs, each step feeling like a monumental effort. My legs were weak, my hands shaking as I clung to the banister for support. The air was still thick with the scent of burning, the remnants of the dark energy that had filled the room clinging to me like a second skin. I couldn't get out of that basement fast enough. The library above, once a place of comfort and refuge, now felt foreign, almost hostile, as if it too had been touched by the darkness that had nearly consumed me. I couldn't stay there any longer. Once outside, the cool night air hit me like a wave, clearing my mind just enough for me to think straight. I looked back at the library, its windows dark and empty, the stone walls cold and unwelcoming. The diary was still clutched in my hands, the leather cover warm to the touch, almost as if it had absorbed some of the energy from the ritual. I wanted to destroy it, to rid myself of the last vestige of the horror I had unleashed. But when I tried to tear the pages, the diary resisted, the paper refusing to tear, the ink refusing to fade. It was as if the diary had a will of its own, a power that refused to be silenced. I tried to warn the townspeople, to tell them what had happened in the basement of the library, but no one believed me. They looked at me with pity, with skepticism, as if I were just another victim of the stress and isolation that sometimes comes with a job like mine. They couldn't see what I had seen, couldn't feel the darkness that still clung to the very air around that place. The library remained open, its doors welcoming visitors, but I couldn't bring myself to enter it again. I knew that whatever I had fought in that basement wasn't truly gone, that it was merely waiting for another opportunity to return. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers never left me. They were faint now, just a murmur at the edge of my hearing, but they were there, a constant reminder of the darkness that still lingered. At night, I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows, could sense the presence of something just beyond the veil of sleep. The diary, still in my possession, seemed to burn with a heat that only I could feel, as if it were alive, as if it were waiting for me to make a mistake, to let my guard down. The terror of that night had seeped into my very bones, and I knew it would never truly leave me. I tried to destroy the diary, to rid myself of its cursed influence, but every attempt ended in failure. Fire wouldn't burn it, water wouldn't drown it, and even when I tried to bury it, it always found its way back to me. It was as if the diary had chosen me, as if I were now its keeper, its guardian. The thought terrified me, but there was nothing I could do. The whispers grew louder with each passing day, the presence of the entity never far from my mind. I was haunted, not just by what I had seen, but by what I knew was still out there, waiting, biding its time. And so I live in fear, knowing that the battle is far from over. The entity may have been banished, but it was not defeated. The library remains, a monument to the darkness that once lurked within its walls, and I know that it is only a matter of time before someone else stumbles upon the diary just as I did. The whispers, the shadows, the terror, it will all begin again, and there will be nothing I can do to stop it. I am left with only one hope, that the next person to find the diary will be stronger, wiser, and more prepared for the horror that awaits. But until then, the darkness remains, waiting for its chance to return.